There is a divide apparently that is happening among the Biden administration in the White House and in Congress. Now, we're going to start with Congress first. A couple of weeks ago, I did tell you that AIPAC is actually seeking to push candidates to actually primary challenge squad members that are in the House to unseat them. And this all revolves around Israel and Gaza, by the way. Well, there is new news that has been released. Well, it appears that they're not just targeting the squad. They are also now targeting the Congressional Black Caucus. Yes, you've heard that right. Now, The Intercept did report this. I want to get into this article and I want to explain to you why I think it has been a grave mistake for the CBC to continue to cower to Democrat establishment, corporations, the military industrial complex, and of course, these special interest groups like AIPAC, these lobbyists. It has been a grave mistake because at the end of the day, they're going to try to get rid of you anyway. So let's go ahead and get into this article here from The Intercept. AIPAC targets Black Democrats while the Congressional Black Caucus stays silent. AIPAC, has given at least $3.6 million to the CBC's old guard since last year, while members of the squad draw the Israel lobby's ire. Let's go in. Public Affairs Committee, the country's most influential pro-Israel lobbying group, is recruiting candidates to challenge progressive members of the Congressional Black Caucus in the primaries next year. The CBC has been silent on the AIPAC bid to challenge at least 3 of its members who are part of the so-called squad, a loose group of progressive representatives. Notice how they call them a loose group. According to the media reports and The Intercept's investigation, the only incumbents AIPAC has targeted so far in this election cycle are CBC members. Now let's talk about the Congressional Black Caucus for a second. One of the criticisms that I've had of this particular caucus in general is that they are supposed to represent the Black community. They're supposed to promote any type of Black issue, any type of legislation that is actually going to help the Black community. But what we've seen over time is that they just sit on their hands. Jim Clyburn brags often about HR 40, about that bill about reparations, which I've told you before is just watered down. It doesn't give any type of cash reparations. It's just little changes here in reference to infrastructure. Ro Khanna talked about this when he came on as well. It's not what you think it is. They brag about the fact that they signed on to this bill, but this bill has been in the House for years. It's never been brought to the floor. Then there's the issue, oftentimes when there were squad members that were pressured, didn't have to give in, but were pressured into agreeing with Democrat establishment. And some of these old guard members of the Congressional Black Caucus, like Jim Clyburn, have heavily criticized anyone who came in that was a squad member that they felt was going to be some type of challenge to Democrat establishment, while also calling theirself progressive. So we've talked about this often before. But one of the most troubling things is the fact that even though this party continuously showed squad members that they did not agree with their policies, that they did not want them there as part of the party in DC in the first place, the squad continued to cower to Democrat establishment instead of fighting for their progressive constituents. And at the end of the day, it did not pay off for them because we see what's happening now. It goes on to say the CBC's silence on the electoral challenges reflects the divide among Democrats on Israel, with progressives increasingly willing to buck Capitol Hill orthodoxies and speak up for Palestinian rights, and fundraising dynamics among caucus members. AIPAC has endorsed more than half of CBC members. The AIPAC-backed members of the caucus, some 31 lawmakers, have received a previously unreported total of at least $3.6 million from AIPAC since February 2022. Now, that's according to the FEC. This gets into corporate money and electoral politics. This is why lobbyists need to go. The reason why these members are not speaking up in support for people like Rashida Tlaib is because they are already in bed with the Israeli lobby. That includes people like Hakeem Jeffries, Richie Torres, Jim Clyburn as well. We've talked about this before. The silence has given rise to calls for the CBC to speak up for members under attack, especially given AIPAC's propensity for directing Republican money to challenge incumbent progressive Democrats in the primaries. AIPAC and its Republican donors are intentionally targeting progressive members of the CBC with right-wing primary challenges. This is coming from Alexandra Rojas, who's the executive director of Justice Democrats, which backed all 5 CBC members from the squad. So here we have AIPAC. They are actually putting forth right-wing challengers to squad members, to members of the CBC, and these other members of the Congressional Black Caucus are silent about it. This is why I continue to tell you that as much as they try to fearmonger you about how dangerous the right can be, they have no problem agreeing with lobbyists supporting right-wing challengers to primary challenge or to challenge these members of the squad and other members of the Congressional Black Caucus. So to that, I ask this question: what is the point of the CBC if they're not actually going to fight for Black issues, if they're not going to champion progressive causes? It's a name. It's just a title of a group of politicians in DC. That's it. That's all it is. It goes on to say the CBC and every caucus in Congress has the opportunity to now demonstrate their power and stand up for all incumbents against AIPAC's role in funneling GOP dollars into Democratic primaries. But we know that is not likely to happen because they know their seats will be threatened. AIPAC is seeking to challenge CBC members Ilhan Omar, Jamal Bowman, because of their support for putting restrictions on U.S. aid to Israel, Jewish Insider reported last month. According to 3 sources with knowledge of the recruiting process who asked for anonymity to protect professional relationships, AIPAC asked Pittsburgh area Democrat Lindsey Powell to challenge Representative Summer Lee. Powell declined. Allegheny County Controller Corey O'Connor also declined an AIPAC invitation to challenge Lee, according to 2 of those sources. Let's go on. Bhavini Patel, a council member in the city of Edgewood, Pennsylvania, is reportedly planning to run against Lee. That is, a Jewish Insider reported that it was unable to confirm if AIPAC had met with Patel. Patel did not respond to requests for comment. While AIPAC declined to respond to specific questions about its involvement in challenges against CBC members, the pro-Israel lobby defended its record supporting Black candidates for Congress. So let me just point out something here. They say they defend Black candidates for Congress, but they don't tell you what type of Black candidates. The Black candidates can be Republican. The Black candidates most likely are probably establishment. The Black candidates are Black in name only and don't really represent the Black community. They promote Black candidates that are going to fulfill their interests. Their interests will come first before any interests of the Black community. This is why you see someone like Richie Torres championing so much for Israel instead of the people in his own district. This is someone who used his race and used his class to his advantage when he was running for office and said, I am the definition of what it is to be progressive. I came from a single parent household. I'm a minority. This is someone who did that. This is someone who used that to his advantage. But Reggie Torres is not paying his constituents in his district any mind. He is actually out there advocating for the state of Israel more than he's advocating for his own people. In fact, I would say he's not advocating for his constituents at all. So he's another one who is sold out. You can add Hakeem Jeffries to that list as well, because he's also in the pocket of lobbyists like AIPAC. This is another reason why we need to remove corporate money from electoral politics. It continues to say that AIPAC proudly endorsed more than half the Black Caucus last cycle and United Democracy Project, an AIPAC-backed super PAC. It helped ensure pro-Israel African-American Democrats in Ohio, North Carolina, and Maryland won their elections. So this goes to show you the influence that AIPAC has. If it's gotten to this point where you support us, we'll support you. We'll make sure that you win as long as you back our cause. This is why the politicians, the Black politicians in DC, don't actually advocate for the Black community. They'll advocate for everybody else. You always have to look at their donors. While we have not made any decisions on specific races this cycle, we are constantly evaluating every seat held by a detractor of the U.S.-Israel relationship, and we base our assessments exclusively on their anti-Israel votes and statements. The CBC did not respond to a request for comment. So I have to say this. It's not just AIPAC. It's all the other lobbyists and donors as well. What do you think would happen if someone who is receiving donations from Blue Cross Blue Shield decides to support Medicare for all? You think Blue Cross Blue Shield wouldn't try to put someone up against them to run against them? This is what they do. We talked about last week how Hill Harper actually was basically, they tried to bribe Hill Harper with $20 million for his campaign for him to renege on his run for Senate and actually to run against Rashida Tlaib in the House instead. Now, Hill happens to be, has morals and said, no, I can't be bought. It goes on to say here, old guard versus the squad. 5 progressive officials have joined the CBC's ranks since 2019. Their addition strained already shifting dynamics in the caucus, which has long been governed by traditional structures of seniority and patronage. Seniority and patronage. You see this? Traditional structures. The caucus has sometimes stood against the new crop of rising Black progressives. The CBC bet against Representative Ayanna Pressley in 2018 and backed her white incumbent opponent, former Representative Mike Cupiano. So I remember this race. I lived in Ayanna Pressley's district when this race happened. Presley won and joined the CBC. Bowman angered the old guard of the caucus when he endorsed progressive candidate Cori Bush in her 2020 primary in Missouri against Representative William Lacey Clay, a centrist who had been a CBC member for 2 decades. Bush also won and joined the CBC. Now, this is the question I have. This group of politicians were against you, and once you got in, you joined the very group that was against you. These are the kind of things I don't understand. Why would you, it's just like, why do you want to be somewhere that you're not wanted? Why do you want to be a part of a group that is actively working against you? And the problem that you have with like the CBC is that the old guard, people like Maxine Waters, people like Jim Clyburn, the old school peeps that are part of the CBC, they don't want change. They don't like new changes. They want things to, for the most part, remain the same. What has the CBC done for Black communities since its beginning? How have they helped Black communities since its beginning? Ask yourself that question. Their CBC in name only. In name only, they're more willing to advocate for the state of Israel and back Netanyahu than they are to fight for Black constituents in their own districts. This is the illusion of representation. And you'll see a lot of this happening as we go into 2024. There's a lot of illusions happening. There's people out there that are running for office that you think represent you, that the media wants you to believe represent you and actually support the policies that you support. But these people are just puppets. Just another way to keep you in the Democratic Party. It goes on to say divisions on Israel and the CBC, however, go beyond election alliances to policy stances and votes. Since taking office, progressive CBC members, including Omar, Bowman, Lee, Bush, and Presley, have criticized human rights abusive against Palestinians or voted against military aid to Israel. They were among the 10 House Democrats who voted against a July resolution to absolve Israel of being an apartheid state. The critical stance on U.S. support for Israel drew AIPAC's ire, with the group ramping up its efforts to challenge the CBC incumbents. And this is what is going to happen. We'll jump down here and you'll see in 2022, since 2022, the CBC's top AIPAC recipients include Representative Glenn Ivey from Maryland. He has received over $56,000. Hakeem Jeffries, who has taken over $485,000. Valerie Foushee, who has taken over $456,000. Richie Torres received over $459,000, and Chantel Brown, who received over $349,000. These people are not there to help the Black community, guys. These people are there to serve those lobbyists so that they keep their seat. Hakeem Jeffries isn't going to stand up against the state of Israel because he knows they'll send someone out to primary challenge him too. These are not the MLKs. These are not the Malcolm X's. These are not the Fred Hamptons. Because if they were, they wouldn't be there in the first place. Keep that in mind. They would not be there in the House in the first place if they really cared about some type of transformative change for the Black community. They would be out helping people on the streets. Someone in the chat mentioned Muhammad Ali. They're not the Muhammad Alis either. So I want you to hear what this woman said. Her name is Amani Barbarin. This was from TikTok, but it was shared on Twitter. I want you to hear what she says the Democratic Party does wrong, particularly when it comes to Black voters and how they use this identity card, but they don't actually produce anything in reference to helping out those marginalized groups that they are a part of. Listen to this.
I've maintained for a while now that the things liberals think will disintegrate the Republican Party was always going to crumble the Democratic Party first. And I meant that shit, literally. You cannot build an entire platform off of collecting marginalized peoples and then completely abandon them as soon as you get comfortable. And it's not just leadership, it's literally the entire base that acts like that. And their outreach strategy is not to actually listen to people or to empower people. It is to keep them in their place, particularly Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And the moment people fall out of that line or question anything, they resort to the exact same tactics MAGA Republicans do, which is absolutely fucking hilarious because those same tactics as people of color, as Black people and Indigenous people, we've been taught to avoid at all costs for our own fucking safety. You all didn't beat the MAGA Republicans that you hate, you became them. But it doesn't work for you like it works for them. And now you're shocked that people are reacting to you all in the exact same way. Why wouldn't they? You're a danger to them. You're gaslighting them. And everything you're seeing now is the difference between liberal and conservative racism. I've maintained for a while now that the things liberals think will...
So we'll come back to this because I want you to think about what she's saying here. Because there's something that she said, and this is why I like this video, because there's something that she said that I want you to understand how they're very much like Republicans in some ways. Listen to this part.
I've maintained for a while now that the things liberals think will disintegrate the Republican Party was always going to crumble the Democratic Party first. And I meant that shit, literally. You cannot build an entire platform off of collecting marginalized peoples and then completely abandon them as soon as you get comfortable.
And that's exactly what the Democratic Party has been doing. Members of the squad have done that. All of them. This is what all of them have done, right? When Joe Biden was running for president, what did he say? You don't want to get Donald Trump. I'm running on the soul of America. Black voters, if you vote for me, I will make sure that you get those $2,000 checks. Then don't produce. Then they get upset when you don't want to vote for them.
It's not just leadership. It's literally the entire base that acts like that. And their outreach strategy is not to actually listen to people or to empower people. It is to keep them in their place.
Their outreach strategy is to keep you in your place, not to empower you, not even to listen to you. They don't want you to cross the line. See, once you cross the line, you got to go. If you're a politician and you cross the line, they will find a way to get you out of Congress. So they did this to Dennis Kucinich. They did the Cynthia McKinney. They're trying to do it to the squad members, trying to do it to CBC members now. That's what they'll do. But they don't want the constituents to cross the line either. How dare you not come out and support me after I've done nothing for you but said that I would? I'm a member of your community.
Particularly Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And the moment people fall out of that line or question anything, they resort to the exact same tactics MAGA Republicans do, which is absolutely fucking hilarious. Because those same tactics, as people of color, as Black people and Indigenous people, we've been taught to avoid at all costs for our own fucking safety. You all didn't beat the MAGA Republicans that you hate, you became them. But
she said the Democratic Party did not beat the MAGA Republicans that they hate. She said they became them. Now, I would argue that both of these parties, again, they're corporate. They both support the MIC. They both support these corporations, and they put corporate interests first. That's the way it's been as long as I've been alive. It wasn't always that way. We didn't always have PACs and super PACs. So I would argue the Democratic Party was already that way. Now they're just showing it a little bit more.
It doesn't work for you like it works for them. And now you're shocked that people are reacting to you all in the exact same way. Why wouldn't they? You're a danger to them. You're gaslighting them. And everything you're seeing now is the difference between liberal and conservative racism. I've maintained
liberal and conservative racism. Notice she pointed out liberal racism too, because it happens on both sides. So well said there from her. Now, I point this out because it's not just about AIPAC trying to unseat CBC members. It's not just about that. There is also this issue with the divide that is happening in the White House. Now, apparently, internally in the White House, there are disagreements in reference to how Biden is handling this issue with Israel and Gaza. Take a listen to this. Morning Joe talked about this morning. I thought this was pretty interesting, or the other morning, excuse me.
Progressives have been far more hostile, far more skeptical, if that's the word you want to use, towards Israel and America's close alliance with Israel through the years, far before October the 7th, than, say, Republicans. Republicans are fairly united on this issue. But the White House really feeling this right now, aren't they?
Yeah, there's no question. And what they're saying privately to their allies is they believe this is in a way like the his campaign in 2020, where you ignore the noise, you keep your head down, you do the work, and you'll be rewarded, believing these Democrats.
Let's go back to what he just said right there about keeping your head down. Let's go back a little bit further because I want to make a point.
White House really feeling this right now, aren't they?
Yeah, there's no question. And what they're saying privately to their allies is they believe this is in a way like the his campaign in 2020, where you ignore the noise, you keep your head down, you do the work, and you'll be rewarded, believing.
All right, let's pause there for just a second. He said you keep your head down and you ignore the noise and do the work and you will be rewarded. I want you to understand what he's saying. Keep your head down about genocide. He calls that noise. That's not noise. That is a human rights issue, which has been established multiple times by the UN before October 7th. Keep your head down and do your work. You know, I had a job one time where my former supervisor told us not to come in and talk, not to voice any concern, just keep our head down and do our work. I quit that job very quickly. What kind of facility is this? What kind of organization is this where you can't feel comfortable to voice concerns, to voice your opinion? Where in order for you to keep your job, you just need to be quiet and just nod your head. Who wants to live that? Who wants to work like that? This is what they expect you to do.
These Democrats aren't going to stray. That come next November, they'll come home and vote for the president. But this is tricky terrain. We have seen polls that suggest young voters, in particular liberal voters, some voters of color, are very unhappy with how this administration has so closely aligned itself with Israel. They feel like they're not doing enough on the Palestinian cause. And Annie Yasmin's terrific reporting, in a meeting where the president was preparing to give a speech defending Israel, it was the vice president who made sure that they include a line about the evils of Islamophobia as well, and not just anti-Semitism. So that in itself is reflective of the tricky dynamics they have going forward. Once it can only get harder if the all-out assault, Joe and Mika, by Israel into Gaza resumes in the coming days.
So notice how he said it was actually the vice president who was the one who brought up the Islamophobia. So we covered that before when Kamala Harris actually brought that up. But one of the things that I do want to add is that, remember, that is Kamala Harris and Joe Biden out there begging for votes, because they know that Joe Biden's numbers have continued to decrease, but they're tanking even more now. They know that the majority of Democrat voters do not support the way that he has handled this issue with Israel and Gaza. So don't get it twisted. Kamala Harris didn't come out with that statement because she actually cares. She came out with that statement because they're trying to make sure that they can win re-election. But there are internal issues in the White House around this particular issue. It says the White House grapples with internal divisions on Israel and Gaza. The Hamas attacks and Israeli reaction have roiled the Biden team like no other issue during his presidency. So as I told you before, this is not good for the Biden administration. It says earlier this month, a group of about 20 distressed White House staffers requested a meeting with Biden's top advisors as Israel's war in Gaza entered its 6th week. The diverse group of staffers had 3 main issues they wanted to discuss with the White House Chief of Staff, Jeff Zients, Senior Advisor Anita Dunn, and Deputy National Security Advisor John Feiner. They wanted to know the administration's strategy for curbing the number of civilian deaths, the message it plans to send on the conflict, and its post-war vision for the region. So these are staffers who came forward. It says that Zients, Dunn, and Feiner listened respectively, but some participants felt they fell back on familiar talking points and said a White House official familiar with the meeting who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss a private exchange. The administration had to be careful not to criticize Israel in public so it could influence its leaders in private, the advisors said. U.S. officials were pushing Israel to minimize civilian casualties, and the president and his top aides were advocating for a 2-state solution once the conflict was over. I'm going to add this. I got to say this is important. They are not trying to criticize the state of Israel in public, not necessarily because they're trying to work with them behind the scenes in private, but because they know damn well that there are donors and lobbyists and other groups that are pro-Israel PACs and organizations that would pull their money and their donations from a lot of the politicians that sit in DC. Remember what Ralph Nader said? He said that AIPAC already knows that they have at least, 420 votes? That's why they don't want to criticize them publicly. Now, I want to jump to this piece here. Scroll down. Because there's one piece here. That I wanted to get to because I don't want to read. Biden at times has seemed to wrestle with his own emotions regarding the war. On October 25th, he voiced skepticism about the Gaza death toll provided by the Gaza Health Ministry, which is controlled by Hamas. I have no notion that the Palestinians are telling the truth about how many people are killed. Remember, that was a contradict. Excuse me. I can't talk tonight. That was a conflicting statement that Joe Biden had made as well. It says the following day, Biden met with 5 prominent Muslim Americans who protested what they saw as his insensitivity to the civilians who were dying. And we talked about that. Then he came back and he said that he was sorry, he apologized, etc. But it goes on to say here, many in the White House have been aware since the outset of the political peril that the conflict poses for Biden. Since Hamas launched its attack on October 7th, administration officials have held regular discussions with staffers, political appointees, and outside groups to reassure them and to gauge their reaction. On October 7th, many in the White House responded viscerally for the brutal nature of the atrocities. Zients emailed staffers expressing empathy with Jewish staffers and those with personal ties to Israel. Many Jewish staffers appreciated the note, but some Arab and Muslim officials felt it was tone deaf to their concerns, given that Israeli officials were vowing to carry out a scorched earth campaign in Gaza. So there is now an issue internally in the White House about Israel and Gaza. So there's a division there. So what I can say is this. I think we are probably getting to the point where we are starting to see that there is some type of division that is happening. Now, it did not happen over Medicare for All. When we wanted the squad to use that little bit of leverage that they had to force the vote for Medicare for All, didn't end up happening over that issue, but it's happening over this issue. And this time, staffers are speaking up against it. Don't know how long they'll have that job. But Joe Biden was recently in Nantucket, and this was over Thanksgiving break. Even in Nantucket, they let him know that he's Genocide Joe. So you can see what's happening there. You can see that he was greeted with protesters at the event that he went to in Nantucket. So that was interesting. Now, then this goes on to the next issue, which is, where do you go from here? So we know that hostages have been exchanged on both sides. This happened over the weekend while I was on break. We know that this has happened. But the question has always been, after this is over, what happens next? What are the next steps? What happens to the Palestinian people? Joe Biden is now advocating for a two-state solution, and he went on record saying that. You guys know how I feel about a two-state solution. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about it tonight because I want to make a comparison. We'll get there. I don't think a two-state solution is going to work, and I'll explain to you in a couple minutes why I don't think that will work. Joe Biden is now advocating for a two-state solution, but Netanyahu does not feel the same. This is what Joe Biden said. Listen to this, and we'll get to Netanyahu's statement.
I want to thank all three leaders for their personal partnership to get this done. I spoke with the Emir and President al-Sisi and the Prime Minister Netanyahu again on Wednesday to confirm the elements of the engagement. As I said, today's release are the start of a process. We expect more hostages to be released tomorrow, and more the day after, and more the day after that. Over the next few days, we expect that dozens of hostages will be returned to their families. We also remember all those who are still being held and renew our commitment to work for their release as well. 2 American women and 1 4-year-old child, Abigail, who remains among those missing. We also will not stop until we get these hostages brought home and an answer to their whereabouts. As we look to the future, we have to end this cycle of violence in the Middle East. We need to renew our resolve to pursue this 2-state solution where Israelis and Palestinians can one day live side by side in a 2-state solution with equal measure of freedom and dignity. 2 states for 2 peoples. And it's more important now than ever. And I want to thank all 3 leaders.
Okay, so he's now advocating for a 2-state solution. Now, here's the problem. Netanyahu is not in agreement with this. Netanyahu rejects creation of a Palestinian state despite global outcry. So you see the problem here? So I just want to jump to this part right here. See if I can make this a little bit bigger because the text is very small so you guys can see. Public broadcaster Khan revealed that Netanyahu met with at least 10 lawmakers from his right-wing Likud party last week to seek their support in the face of growing criticism. I am the only one who will prevent a Palestinian state in Gaza and the West Bank after the war, Netanyahu told lawmakers. So Netanyahu is not in favor of a 2-state solution. So again, what is going to happen to the Palestinian people after this is over? It goes on to say Netanyahu also made it clear to members of the faction that he will fight for leadership of the Likud after the conflict, although his popularity is in free fall. The head of government also minimized the accusations of U.S. President Joe Biden, who faces strong pressure in his own Democratic Party to end Israeli aggression. I have known Biden for over 40 years, and I know how to speak to the American public. That statement came from Netanyahu. So Netanyahu has more hold over what our government does in reference to foreign policy, at least in the Middle East, than our own government does. I've asked you this, guys, before. I ask it again. Who is running this country? Now I want to make a comparison before I get a chance to do so. If you haven't done so, smash that like button. That helps me out with the algo. Thank you very much. Because I'm going to talk about what will happen. We're going to look at 2 possible scenarios, 2-state solution versus a 1-state solution. Now, oftentimes people tell me that the Palestinian struggle is not connected to the African-American struggle in the United States. But I'm going to use 2 specific examples to compare the 1-state and the 2-state solution that happened here in the United States. First, we're going to start with Nat Turner's revolt. Let's pull this up. Nat Turner's revolt was August 1831. Now, one of the things that Norm Finkelstein had mentioned, you'll hear tonight on the other clip, is that he was comparing what happened to the basic resistance of Hamas, etc., not agreeing with the civilian casualties, but he was comparing it to Nat Turner's revolt. And this goes back to that question I continue to bring up. do occupied people have the right to resist? Because some of the same historians that praise Nat Turner's revolt don't seem to be in favor of any other kind of revolts, particularly when it comes to the Palestinian people. So we'll start there, but we're going to go forward because we're going through a timeline. Eric, this is moving very, very slow. Like, I don't know why it's doing this, but we'll get to Plessy versus Ferguson. Let's talk about this idea of a two-state solution. When we compare this to the struggle of African Americans in the United States, think about separate but equal 1896 Plessy versus Ferguson, which basically established, because you got to remember this is after slavery. So there was this question of, well, now that the slaves are freed, what do we do with them? Where do they go? That et cetera thing. You had Reconstruction. You had Black Wall Streets, and you had those Black Wall Streets that were burned down. So we're fast forwarding to separate but equal. Separate but equal, this case in particular basically said that Black people and white people can live in separate vicinities, but they'll still be equal. So you'll have separate schools, you'll have separate neighborhoods, separate churches, etc., but they'll be equal. Problem is, they were separate, but they weren't equal. This is why this was overturned later on by Brown versus Board of Education. When you think about the two-state solution and the Palestinian people, the fear that I have, and I've brought this up time again, the fear that I have is that if there is a two-state solution, yes, they will be separate, but I don't think they will be equal, and I'm going to tell you why. When you look at the facts and you see that the state of Israel controls the resources, they control the land, the air, the sea, they are the ones that are in power. The Palestinian people don't control anything. They don't control the resources, so they are already at a disadvantage. Similar to what happened to African Americans in this country under separate but equal under Plessy versus Ferguson. Yeah, they were separate, but again, we didn't control the resources. So we always had less than. So it wasn't equal. And we'll get into the trauma piece about that as well. So the fear that I had with the two-state solution is one, is that it will not be equal because the Palestinian people don't have anything. That's the first thing. I mean, is the state of Israel, are they going to allow the Palestinian people to have access to those resources along the Gaza coast? Are they going to allow them to have access to the gas and the oil? That's the first problem. The second problem is this. There are too many settlements in the West Bank. So if you're going to do a two-state solution, what happens to all those settlements that are in the West Bank? This is why I'm against the two-state solution. I don't think this is the answer. And I can tell you again, I do not think that it would be equal for the Palestinian people. Now we're going to fast forward to Brown versus Board of Education.
One way to avoid expensive car.
Oh, sorry about that. It has a little ad thing that pops up. We're just going to fast forward right here. Brown versus Board of Education, May 17th, 1954. Now, why is this significant? Brown versus Board of Education overturned Plessy versus Ferguson. And the reason why they were able to get this overturned, thanks to people like Thurgood Marshall, is because Thurgood Marshall, who was the lawyer at that time, before he was a Supreme Court judge, he was a lawyer who was able to prove that the separate but equal law under Plessy versus Ferguson actually made things more worse psychologically for African Americans in this country. So the Black children felt like they were less than because they didn't have the school buses to get to school. And if they did, they were falling apart. They didn't have the resources that the white kids had. That made them feel like they were less than. And so when they implemented the baby doll test in the courtroom, he was able to prove by bringing Black children up on the stand and asking them questions. Point to the doll that's pretty. Point to the doll that's ugly. Point to the doll that's good. Point to the doll that's bad. What he proved is that separate but equal actually inherently hurts the African American community psychologically, physically, and mentally. Brown versus Board of Education overturned Plessy versus Ferguson. Now this goes to the one-state solution, because let's keep it real. There are some who believe a one-state solution would be the best way to go, where you have one state and Palestinians and Israelis can live side by side with each other, and everybody have the same rights, the same access, etc. But there's a con to this as well, if we want to compare it to the United States. What happened after Brown versus Board of Education? Integration happened. And when there was integration, although now we're opening up these resources to everybody, the problem that Black people ran into were the systemic issues. So African Americans were still discriminated against in this country even after integration, because even though there were laws on the books that said you can't discriminate, there were other ways to get around doing it. So the question that I have with the one-state solution in reference to the Palestinian people, do we believe that the Israeli state, let's say it's all one state now, they're all together, do we believe that everybody is going to be treated the same? Do we believe that Israelis are going to feel comfortable with Palestinians living side by side next door to them again? Do we believe that Palestinians are going to feel comfortable with Israelis living side by side next door to them again? This is what happens when you do not address and redress and come to some point of healing with these types of issues. Part of the reason why we still have these issues in this country in reference to the white community, the Black community, is because there was never any acknowledgement in terms of addressing the issue, redress, and coming to a point of healing. There was no healing. This is why slavery is still a very tense moment for people. This is why it's still a very bitter thing. And then what happened after? You still had Jim Crow. After Brown versus Board of Education, you still had the war on drugs. After the war on drugs, you still had the crime bills. So who's to say if they're under a one-state solution that there won't be things implemented by the IDF, that they will find ways to still criminalize the Palestinian people, just like white people did Black people in the United States? This is one of the fears that the Palestinian people have, is that they won't be treated the same. I brought that up to you because I want you to think about that for a second. I know for a fact the two-state I don't think would work. Again, what do you do about all those settlements in the West Bank? And I don't think it would be equal. But I also don't even know if a one-state solution would work, because are we supposed to pretend like the Palestinian people are just going to forget all of the things that happened to them under the hands of Netanyahu? That they're just going to forget that entire family lines were wiped out? So this is something I want us to think about. But I said before, and I had this conversation with Marianne, I do not think a two-state solution would work. Because if you have two states, then we're talking about Gaza and we're talking about the West Bank. But what happens to all those settlements in the West Bank? Something to think about. But there is a divide there in the White House, internal divide. And there's an issue with AIPAC coming against the CBC politicians. So I think we are starting to see more and more now just how strong of a hold that these lobbyists and these interest groups have on the politicians in DC. Thank you for the super chat, Michael. Thank you for covering this. You are welcome. JB says, Sabs, while AIPAC is definitely worth talking about, we should also remember J Street is a Zionist lobbying group that focuses solely on Dems. This is true. Many progressives get money from J Street and defend. Yes, that's true. In fact, if I remember correctly, Jamal Bowman was getting money from them too, but I think it was individual donations from J Street. But yeah. Thank you, Eric, for the super chat. It is especially important that as Black radicals that we call out the Black bourgeoisie so that they cannot hide behind identity. That's right. Thank you for the super chat, Raphael. Joe Biden in 1987, we Delawareans were on the south sides of the 3 Civil War. Good job with the piece on the housing, sister. Thank you. You are welcome. Miguel says there needs to be reparations to Palestinians. Israel would have to pay for that. I think that money should come from the state of Israel. Miguel, fix the injustice against Palestinians who lost their land. The Oracle says, does a 2-state solution include 2 standing militaries? And will Israel subject itself to an international nonpartisan body drawing up the divide line? That's a good point. So Gaza does not have a military. For those who are not aware, they currently do not have one. Israel does. I don't know. I'm not sure if that would work. And the other question, will Israel subject itself to an international nonpartisan body drawing up the divided line? I don't think they would. And that's the other thing that I fear as well. I don't think that under Netanyahu's leadership, I don't think that they would be fair. That's my take on that.